Hello, everybody, and welcome to another RCT2 review stream. The other day, we did Six Flags Worlds of Excitement by Fitage, and it got pretty well received, seeing some more classic park making. So I decided to do another classic today, per suggestion in the Discord. Today, we're going to look at Premier Amusement Park version 2 by SupremeScreamer. Granted, I'd never seen a version 1, so I don't know what that was, but this one kind of stands out to me as another one of my favorites back in the day before a lot of the more recent parks have come along. So it's got a similar sort of realistic feel to it. It was sort of the realism of the time, I suppose, with some pretty good coasters, kind of suspect architecture, but some neat ideas overall. I think this park probably would land maybe a tier down from Worlds of Excitement, not by too far. It remains still one of my favorite parks, and it holds up rather well. So let's jump on in and dive down. Ooh, not to that side. We're going to start down here at the front entrance. The closest I can figure is this is sort of a Six Flags-ish type park. It's got some similar stuff in there. This kind of feels almost a Cedar Fair-ish type entrance. But kind of the name of the game in this whole park is that bigger than you need as far as some stuff goes. So there's a lot of ticket booths here as we start. This is the Elite Resorts line apparently coming in. And then here we have the actual entrance to the park itself. A few less questionable object choices on this one, although these flowers classify as the questionable object choice. So we start out with just a little bit of architecture and things like that. So some kind of a walk-up building of sorts here, and then some ATM locations, and then a couple of other little spots here before we start getting to the ride itself, like Bombshell, this guy. You also see here there's a pathway down to the Premier Subway, which is a monorail that runs the entire length of the whole thing, which is a little bit odd, especially considering that we have the quick rail up top, which also takes you to a lot of the places. But once we get into the coasters, I think the things improve a little bit. But before we get to there, we have our little picnic grove here, which comes across this kind of neat little bridge, and all the way out to the other side here where we have our water park. We might as well actually start in the water park just to kind of get that out of the way, because unfortunately this was before a lot of the hacking, which made water parks more interesting. So we have a lot of just kind of static scenery to look at. Another nice little picnic grove, a little more planned, I suppose, and regular than the other one. But some neat slides overall. Just none of them are working, so there's not really a whole lot to look at. I will say I do like the Valley of Fear here. This is the half-pipe type slides. That's a pretty cool and super imposing slide. Suspect American flag objects, though. Nice little wave pool and some of the mechanical room behind it, which is nice. And then a pretty gigantic pool here for these kind of 4 slides. This knot of slides kind of reminds me of there's a slide tower in real life at a park called Rokko Island in Japan that had just this massive thing of slides. It was like 27 slides, I think. Pretty incredible. But there's also a little coaster here, so this is the one thing that's interesting to see. This is Super Soaker, which is a set point, presumably, liquid coaster, like was at Hershey Park and Carowinds, both of which are no longer there. Pretty simple, straightforward layout, but kind of like the real thing. Honestly, a little bit longer than the real thing. I think my only gripe about this is that it doesn't really go out over the path as much as it maybe ought to. This kind of ride is all about interaction, so, and as far as I'm concerned, this whole thing ought to be out over the pathway to some extent, since the riders could drop water on the guests below, and then the guests below could shoot water up. So I don't know if that's meant to be these guys here as little controlled cannons, perhaps, but either way, it would have been kind of neat to see that done. All right, and then you can pop out the backside here, and then we can take this picnic grove all the way back. Got some little landscaping here and all that. All right, well, let's hang a left off of the main central Midway. You can actually see this Midway runs the entire length of the main area here. This is nice park planning just as far as simplicity goes, because you have your main Midway, one loop on this side, one loop on this side, and sort of this dead-end-ish area, but it's still a loop right there. So it's a pretty simple park plan, but it works. It works really well. We have a double-decker carousel here. A lot of the reliance on the quarter blocks, which I guess were kind of the thing of the time. That's really, if you wanted to sculpt something unique, that's what you built them out of, since there weren't really more specific parts and pieces. So here we have Twister. This is the first of the coasters. So this is either an Arrow or a Vekoma. We'll call it an Arrow because it looks sort of like the custom looping coasters. 5-car train is a little bit short for a typical Arrow coaster. Usually you're going to see them at 7, but that does vary, so it's not a hard and fast rule per se. 6 quick inversions on this on a pretty short layout. The thing's pretty much entirely inversion, which, to be fair, is kind of what some of the coasters are. Well, this is on the lift, so I did neglect to mention this kind of weirdo fountain thing, which is neat, but has no sides on it, so unless you're getting wet, I'm taking the other side. Alright, so here's a nice diving curve drop into 2 loops raised up, because that's what Arrow did at the time. Same diameter loop, just raised up per the speed, into the boomerang element that Arrow called it, which is actually a batwing. Double corkscrew over the path, typical theme park trope, and into the brakes. Nice selection of custom supports here, and takes us down to this one, which I wanted to speed to here just to see it. This is a giant inverted boomerang from Vekoma. A little bit odd sitting right next to this guy, perhaps, but nice little similar color scheme with the dark purple and the blue. Custom supports are the best thing I can say about this one. It's pretty well done, well put together. Glitchy as anything through some of these areas, but I think you just kind of took what you could get at the time. This one doesn't have the cross in the layout. The real one of these is an X-shaped layout, but it's tough to do without submerging and just picking and choosing your battles as to what's most interesting to do. It's also a little bit short, perhaps, and the 5-car train should be an 8-car train, but just to get it a little more in scale. So I would have maybe scaled this thing up a little bit. But, I mean, good attempt. You don't usually see a whole lot of these for one, but there we are. And then to round out the trio of coasters here, we have the Nevada Cyclone. So clues us into where the park is from. Kind of a nice queue line here, although I always kind of think these solid fences are a little bit odd in queue lines because theoretically with the peep height, you couldn't really see over top of them. So all this great scenery around, I'm not sure you'd be seeing. But I get it from a lighting the path standpoint. All right, so we have 2 trains here and a pretty simple out and back layout, which looks pretty good. It doesn't have a manufacturer on it, but you can kind of assume it was like the Summers and Din type time frame for this kind of a thing. It looks a little bit more modern than some of like the Prior and Church older stuff. Interesting little dive down and around. I do like this outward banked corner or trough, I guess, in the hill. It's a nice little touch. I mean, there's not too much to the layout. It's pretty simple. It has some airtime hills and nice little covered brake run as well. So we wrap around the back, we get to some kind of one-off themed flat rides. This is kind of neat. The cage that has the theming around the teacups. It's a neat little design. Lunar Giant, and here is a China Market. So this kind of does follow the approach of a Six Flags, where you have some themed areas, but also for the most part just kind of unthemed or generic theme park or amusement park theme across the entire area, and then each of the structures has its own individual theme. Here's the Sunrise Wheel, so there's 2 of them side by side, synced together. I do like that motion of having both of them together. I'd almost see if you could offset them in opposite directions, make it feel a little bit faster perhaps. Pretty decent size little structure here. So this is the Grand Par Theater. And as we continue on the back side here, we're going to spin around at a couple of game stalls on this side, and then this classic swings with a nice little presented space there. And then over on this side, we've got Tremble Tower, which is 3-4. Those are... looks like sort of syncs together also. I think they all have downward launch, which is a little bit odd. Usually in a combo tower such as this, you see some of them as as one and some of them as others, but a little bit different. So here's the Wild Whirl. This is a spinning wild mouse. Interesting because it kind of follows a standard wild mouse shape until it gets to the end, and then it kind of goes off here and does something a little bit wonky. So there's that realism attempt here at the beginning, and then it kind of does its own thing here. You don't see a whole lot of custom designs of these, especially this type. But when you do, usually the whole thing is custom. Little bit questionable as far as landscaping types go, although I do like those red trees as some bushes in there, and just the queue line on it in itself. And then on this side of the path, we have the tricycle rentals out there on the water, which looks like nobody is partaking today. All right, and then we get to this guy, which is probably the signature attraction in the park, or one of them, because it's got a ton of good coasters. This is Unlimited, definitely a Superman the Ride type theme. Again, we're going with the theme of shorter trains. This is a 6-car train. Could have been 8, could have been 9, but you probably wanted a little longer than a 6, at least for this type. But the layout on this one's pretty cool. You get a lot of Superman the Ride at New England vibes at Six Flags New England, with the cool custom supports too, so sort of the Millennium Force-ish supports, which I quite like, and then some of the custom supports on this side back when all we really had to work with were the chunky supports. But I like this start here with the airtime hill, the diagonal, the turnaround, and then this one crossing it. 2 more, then kind of repeat the same method here, cross around with another little airtime hill. Dive down into this tunnel, which goes up into this start of this figure 8 deal here. Another tunnel and this kind of steep climbing drop out of it. Little helix here inside some theming, and then back to the brake run itself over here. A couple little airtime hills there. Some attempted a transfer track, although this one couldn't work. Really, you need half of this, and then this guy will be the thing that slides over to that side, but at least there's an attempt. Then let's take the little picnic grove sort of area over to the kids area here, which is sort of a dead end, although it kind of looks like it's almost its own little park space on this side. Mario themed, which is kind of interesting, having just reviewed the Mario Kart park. So here's Mario Kart Raceway, which kind of encompasses a number of the themes all in one spot here with the go-kart track. And then on this side, we've got the Mario Speedster, little kids coaster. Kind of like it. It doesn't really do anything after the first drop. It's all flat, but it's nice little corners and some cool little dodging the pipes and the brick walls and things like that. Over here, there's a castle, but we don't really have a clue of what's into it because there's not any signage with it. And then on this side, we've got a couple of little junior rides, like the Mario Brothers Hot Rods, the Yoshi Rush. This is the Mushroom Hill, Super Ball Pit, and then Animal Fun Tent. So kind of interesting in the fact that this is kind of treated as a separate entrance. So this says Mario World, and then this says gates open at 9:30. So I guess you kind of get 2 for 1 when you buy this, because there's not really a ticket booth between these, so I'm not quite sure how that works out. I'd be a little questioning, though, the entrance that runs across the highway here. That's a little bit odd from the parking lot. I think you're going to Frogger that, or watch out for some cars. Alrighty, so let's continue along. This brings us back to the Midway here, so we'll go along. And there's a couple of buildings here. I mean, it's definitely got a bit of a random feel to it. They all sort of have their own kind of style and color and texture and everything else. Not too much there. Again, like I said in the beginning, this is a good lesson in maybe a little bit of excess, such as this pathway, which is just absolutely massive. Not the worst thing ever, but there's not a lot breaking it up. Some planters and things would have potentially helped that. Ignoring the ugly American flags, we have a couple of different themed pieces here. This is a restroom building, which is a little bit odd, although I do like the little stacked pipes on top for ventilation, presumably. Little food stall, some pretty terrible seats and scenery items there, but this is cool. The water splash ride, this is Chainsaw River. This is where we get into some of the questionable names that you'll see a little bit later on in the park. Nice little drop over here, over top of the water. Would have been good to zero clearance these footers all the way down to the bottom of the water, but this is kind of a neat space to walk up and go view the water ride. Theoretically, I would think there'd be some sprayers there or something like that. A couple game stalls, a little locker stall, and we will jump back to this side here and finish up this side of the Midway. Nice little view across this lake, especially the suspended coaster on this side. Here is Poison. This is a Chance Skyrider. There aren't very many of these left. I think most of the rest of these are only on traveling fairs now, and they're kind of hard to find, but they're a wild, really, really crazy flat ride if you ever get a chance to do one. Here is Wonderstand Foods, another little shop in the middle of the plaza here, which is kind of a nice way to break up the path. I think maybe some planters to kind of soften the edge there would have also helped a little bit. And an attempt with the different colored path pieces here. It's always good to use some different path pieces, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend, like this section here, looking at it, you have 1 path, 2 path, main path, 3, 4, 5, looks like 5 path types all in one shot here, and that's not necessarily the best. You kind of want to give it some variety. But let's continue on to the rides over here. So this is Gravedigger. This is an Arrow suspended coaster with an appropriately long train. I'd probably go 10 just since it's using the suspended floorless. So we start out with a Big Bad Wolf-esque drop over the water. Then some kind of typical curved sections here. A little bit more hill than usual on this type of ride. And then this has some little flat sections. I kind of do like this little double dip here. It's not necessarily realistic, but it just kind of looks interesting. And then we have our flat bit here getting back to the actual brake run up here. Single train, no transfer, which is fine. Almost would have liked to have seen a different color on this, or a brighter color or something, especially with the station in as wild colors as it is. But it's kind of a nice little layout off in the woods, and then gives this lakeside a pretty good vantage spot, especially too from this side out of the water park. All right, then on the other side here we have more games. Here is something called Thriller, which is a Space Rings attraction. And then we get to Subvision Destruction. Like I said, some odd names with the vertical drop coaster. And this one kind of starts out pretty well with this pretty interesting drop in through this little waterfall feature, and just the fact that any guest can go walk around this whole thing. Like, I think that's pretty cool. So we have our drop here into the hold brake, and then dive down and then up and into a pretty twisted layout here. This is kind of where the realism falls apart just a little bit. We have this like vortex type helix corner into the brakes, and then turn around. There's a flat S-bend there for some reason, and then curve around to some airtime hills, and then back into the brake run. So it's a little bit of an odd duck as far as a layout goes, but you know, it's not too bad, and the colors are cool, especially the rails being a different color than the track itself. Here is the Urban Spinner. One of the things that I can't see it there, that I tend to kind of like on these is spinning this the other way around, so that as it tilts up, you give all the guests on your path a view of the ride itself. So I think that's a nice trick to consider with this sort of a ride. Times board is neat, so it's got times for each of the different queues. So apparently 2 Extreme is 90 minutes, which is our 4D coaster here that we'll see in a little bit. I like this, the viewpoint needle. So this is our little observation tower. Especially points for building a custom observation tower, because there are some standard decent ones in the game, but definitely some consideration as to how this was done as far as the structure goes, and I like it a lot. I think it is one of the better structures in the game. All right, on this side we've got an employees area, no entry sign there, which is a little bit odd with the chain link fence and everything. And then a big theater right on this side with the seats and everything, so that's kind of cool to have. And then our under construction coaster here. This is a Screaming Squirrel. In real life, one of the most awful coasters I've ever ridden. So would not recommend it. But I do think it's pretty neat to take a coaster that really couldn't be built in a pleasant looking way in the game and do it here, because now you can build the parts that are able to be built in the game, but not the hard parts. So that's a good choice as far as I'm concerned. So pretty cool look overall. And you can see all the pieces of support there. And then the crane, although the crane probably needs a couple more on the end of that because it's not going to be doing a whole heck of a lot otherwise. And then our little massive construction caution pieces here. But such was the deal with custom scenery at the time. So over on this side, we've got 2 Extreme, which is a pretty cool front entry sign and a pretty interesting queue. This is a 4D coaster with a custom layout and proper seat rotation. That is one of the things that I really appreciate about people who do the 4D coasters, is that you can also do the seat rotation, and it's a pain and a hassle, and it is just difficult to do overall. But the fact that you have it in there is always kind of nice to see. So vertical, face down, first drop, flip on your back into the Raven turn. And then we're going to go through a couple of airtime hills, which is maybe not the best on one of these coasters. Another Raven turn, up on top of the track now, down this kind of curved hill here. And then we're going to go through this double Raven turn, I don't know what you'd call it, element, with the turn underground, which is kind of neat. I do like that. And then fast corner here. Ending with 2 more little airtime hills and then into a half twist into the brakes. I do like that, like I said, that this is a custom ride, custom supports, always nice to see, tunnels and things like that. Ideally, your tunnel gets a little bit wider than this just because of the wideness of the train itself. I mean, yes, it fits in 1 tile per the game, but it's maybe not the best choice as far as visually appealing tunnels and things go. He did hide the S-bend here, which is something that I typically avoid. Like, I'd almost do this kind of a Raven turn where you have the curve after it, so you don't have to do the S-bend. But I get it because it's set up for the rest of this whole space. Down here we have the beach, which is kind of nice. It feels very Cedar Point-esque, having a little boardwalk here. I'd have almost put some little shops and stalls or things down here, like a little changing room and things. But you do have over here all those little cabins and little hotel type spaces, which is nice, although they're all the same. And I get they would be all probably the same in the real thing, but maybe some different colors or just some variations. I mean, when we looked at Jaffe's Bumbly Beach Park, all those little row houses had a little bit of a different design in each and every one of them, which I appreciated, even though they still looked the same across the board. So, a little bit of a shame, because just depending on which way you go, but I can see it either way. All right, so let's. This is a good break, so let's wrap right back around to the Midway, and we will continue on our journey up the Midway here. We get to Venom next, which is a Vekoma Flying Dutchman, and actually kind of a neat layout that sort of kind of follows the same sort of design as the real one, where it kind of has a couple of curves. Although kind of simple, it's pretty much all right-hand turns, so something you typically want to avoid. So we have our start here, which is pretty typical of a Flying Dutchman coaster. Wrap around again. And then here we're going to do a little half corkscrew out, which puts us on our back to do the loop. Vekoma flying coasters are the only ones that have done, or well, the first ones to have done a loop, and then B&M did it since. But kind of ending with this big 540 roll here, which is kind of cool. A little bit fast, but not too bad overall. Again, transfer track attempt, not too successful, but at least it's there. 6-car train is also acceptable as you're building this kind of a ride. Here's another theater. So this is the Starlight Theater. I do kind of like the use of this track here as a little canopy cover. Nice kind of bright, obnoxiously colored space here. This says the Clash performs tonight at 8. So getting ready for that. They booked some big names at the time. So there we are. And a cool viewing area down here underneath of the coaster itself. You can walk right up underneath of there and potentially get hit by a flying object. So caution to you. more of these kind of center placed shops and stalls and some games and things like that. This is called Cinnabon. So he does have some different things like that. Another poor questionable object choice. And then this is the end of the quick rail on this side. So you can skip all that Midway and just get down here to some of the bigger parks at the end. Here we have our little water tower, potentially, or just structure. I'm going to guess water tower since this has some Cedar Point basis in it. And then here's our little Lost Children stall, which is a nice touch as well. Some interesting attempts at layering and some object choice. So like this little decor piece over top of the circular windows, and then the steps pieces here is some, I guess, awning overhang pieces. So there's definitely some thought process there. I just don't think it was necessarily the most successful. And then things like this mushroom stall that just doesn't belong in the game. So let's jump over to this side where we have a Lumber Massacre, another questionable name, but an appropriate amount of train or cars, 12-car train, which is a standard GCI thing. So this is assumed to be a GCI coaster. Kind of has those similar twists that you'd kind of expect, although the layout doesn't necessarily fit that overall look of what a GCI would be. But got a couple of hills here into some twists and turns and some curves. Wrap around the first drop there, or around the lift hill. A couple more twists here, kind of hard to follow under there almost as you wrap around everything. As we come back over this way to a final helix and down. I think there's something to be said about coaster flow. I do like some of the other coasters in here, like the Superman type especially. This is a little bit of a jumbled mess, so it's tough just to read which way it's going and which way what it's doing. I think there are definitely ways to get a knot of track while not looking so kind of messy per se. And some of these other coasters that we'll still look at achieve that, I would say. Pretty big station, nice open station there. I kind of like the big arch that they've got there, and then the architecture here, the alternating colors, predating Coaster Bill, but done pretty well there. Let's continue this way, and we will look at Diablo, the little scrambler ride there, and then here is the Retro Spinner, which is a top spin. I actually really like the detailing behind it. Kind of feels like a fairground ride that might have popped over here. All right, somehow they got a second one of these Chance Skydivers, although this is a different looking ride than the other one. So this is the Skydiver, unless I just wasn't paying attention. Nope, they're the same ride. Interesting. Unfortunately, when you have a park this big and the flat rides that were available at the time, you kind of do have to double up on things. I was never a fan of that. It always feels a little bit awkward, but fair enough. You got to put rides in, and if you don't have anything else, you might as well stick with it. A little fireworks show. I would assume the fireworks go off behind the little projection screen here potentially. I do appreciate there is a full projection screen, so here's a light show on top. It's just kind of a nice little touch there. But definitely some cool, clever ideas. This is Alien Invader, again with kind of a neat backdrop, and then our Royal Looper here in the middle, Super Loop type ride. Brings us to this side, and B&M. This is called Suicide, which is probably a regrettable name for a roller coaster. Not too much that's fun about that. So we have a B&M floorless layout, 8-car train, two trains involved. Sort of a similar or standard type layout as you might expect for this kind, but still custom in shaping. I like this layout a fair amount. It could use some tweaking, but for the most part, it's pretty good. We got our kind of flat curve off of the lift with a big diagonal drop into a loop, into a dive loop, and then into a Cobra roll. Struggling a little bit on speed through some of these bits right there. And then we end through the 0G roll and into this helix right at the bottom of the turn, up to the mid-course brake run, through those block brakes, using proper block brakes, which I like. Dive down and then into these interlocking corkscrews at the end. a lot of his coasters, it kind of seemed like when you ran out of space, you just put airtime hills in. So here's 2 more airtime hills, 1 and 2, and then into the brakes. No transfer track, unfortunately, but a pretty long brake run. Could have supported 3 trains, which this coaster could have, being that it has the mid-course brakes there. Good work on the custom supports, also based on what we had at the time to work with. All right, so here's off-road truckers. Pretty sizable layout here with just some kind of back and forth and a little bit of scenery, mostly just trees. Would have been kind of neat to have some different scenery pieces in there, but definitely a nice change of pace since we've had a lot of coasters, but we haven't had a lot of tracked other type rides. And then we get over here to Full Throttle, which I'm guessing this predated Full Throttle of Magic Mountain, so good for picking that name. So this is our Top Thrill Dragster ride type. So here we're going to launch up to a solid 101 miles an hour, it looks like. Over the top, down the twist, 360 twist, and then into the brakes. This guy's running 3 trains, 5 cars per train, which works. This is probably the best train choice at the time. I like this a lot with the brake run through the tunnel. I think that'd be a really neat effect. We have the hydraulic launch station in here as well, and the little photo spot, which you really don't see those used too much these days just because of the big cheesy smiley face. But I don't know, it's nostalgic for me for one. And then a little bit of a chaotic looking station, but has some cool colors to it, and I do like the purple and the yellow on that. All right, we'll backtrack past all these flat rides here. This is the Bump Coliseum, which has 2 of the bumper cars in there. Some more of these weird potted plants, but that's kind of neat having the 2 things, and definitely that calling it the Coliseum and having these sort of Roman-esque columns. I guess it's neat. It's a good touch. All right, we come back here to Black Magic, which is a half Batman. It kind of starts as Batman and then suddenly does other stuff. So we have the custom supports here, definitely inspired by Batman, similar to the Six Flags Worlds of Excitement ones, but maybe a little less polish. Although I do like the supports along the rest of it. So here we have our inverted trains. 9 cars is a little bit too long. I should go with 8. Alpengeist is the only one that has 9. 7 is also an option. Curve drop, loop, 0G roll, and then here's where we kind of take a hard left from Batman and do a Cobra roll that's up kind of high, and then into this, I guess, mid-course brakes, even though it's got a corner in it because it's got the brakes there. Double corkscrew, which is something the B&M doesn't do on theirs, so this could well be a Giovanola, for example, that does do that, or at least the only example of it does, so that's fair. And then we have some curves here that end in a brake run with sort of an awkward S-bend here to the end coming in. I do like this station. I like the openness of it, and the black and the purple work well. So let's back on out of here and go to this section, which is kind of neat. This is a little petting zoo farm space. The only disappointing thing in here is that there's nothing to look at. It would have been kind of neat to use, say, the flying saucers and make them invisible. You see a lot of people doing that now, but it's clear that they have this little petting zoo with all the different little spots for the animals, but there's nothing to look at, unfortunately, which would have been kind of cool to see. All right, as we continue to this, we have Turbulence. This is a custom, I guess, Intamin impulse coaster, so it's a little bit of an odd one, just being that there are no full circuit impulse coasters such as this. Volcano existed, and then they had 2 other full circuit inverted coasters, but there's really nothing like this that exists, and it's a little bit awkward since that pull out of the drop there would probably kill you with the G-forces, so this is a little bit odd, but I will give them points for something unique, and also the custom supports, which are pretty substantial and pretty well done as far as supporting this whole thing goes. So neat ride, neat idea, definitely not necessarily realistic, so it's gonna give and take as to what you want to go with. I do like this custom ride, not operational, unfortunately, because didn't really have the trains at the time. course, you still don't necessarily do, but you can kind of fudge it a little bit. This is the half pipe. I really like this just because it is probably the best looking Intamin half pipe that I had seen at the time. So U-shaped track, station platform that goes all the way up to it, and then the space for the train. But fortunately not there. Could have been neat to see like a little under construction or under maintenance sign or something like that, but don't have it there. On this side, though, we have the twin tanks, Kamikaze and Galactica. I don't know what this one's referencing, but, cool opposing thing. I do like this little structure deal over top of the whole queue. I'm not quite sure what it's doing, but it's a neat design. And then there's this house-looking structure over here. So this is everything Premier. So I'm guessing this is their either shop or could be some kind of boutique hotel. Also could be a restaurant, but unfortunately we don't have any little shops and stalls in there to figure that out. All right, and then I think this is our last coaster. This is Break Run the Ride, otherwise known as Thunderstruck. So we have a pretty substantial brake run here. Also using the GCI trains, I kind of peg this more as a CCI type. It's got some ideas in here, but it becomes a little bit repetitive. Let's take a look at the ride, and then I'll kind of talk about what I like and don't about this. So we're going to start off with a lift hill up the mountain, and then curving to a drop here. Curve and another drop, so kind of a double down. Covered thing to the third drop that goes all the way down, and then airtime hill after airtime hill. Flat corner, and then we'll have another little double down followed by a double up into those mid-course brakes, which are covered, and another curve here, a little bit slow into another double down, a couple more airtime hills, and then what do we do when we have space left over? We fill it with airtime hills. So here we have a couple of little hills here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just barely scraping back to the brake run here that will take a little while to traverse. So I like the ride just because of the kind of epicness of the scale. So I like up the mountain. The fact that it's got this triple drop, the 1, the 2, and the 3. I like this covered bit here. Kind of reminds me of Beast in that regard in terms of just going off into the woods and doing stuff. Also reminds me of something more modern like a CCI coaster because it has this sort of double out and back layout. I think really this could have been improved as far as this goes because really it's all left-hand corners. It's left, 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 left helix. Then our single right-hand turn happens right there, and then also here at the beginning. So a little bit odd there. The long brake run and the covered mid-course brake run kind of reminds me of something like Beast or another one of the older wooden coasters that's using skid brakes that do need to be covered and protected. So that could be the case. It seems more likely, and Beast has a massive brake run because it's got huge trains and a bunch of them. As far as the visual goes, I mean, you have this huge, cool pathway visual with the fountains and everything. I would almost have loved to see some of this happen down here. I mean, even if this big drop ended up coming down this way and had some hills towards the pathway and then went back and did stuff in the mountains, that may be a better choice overall. But, I mean, it's an interesting layout and an interesting take on the coaster type. Just because it's sort of off in the woods in the back and pretty huge, as it turns out. On this side, we do have another little entry point here. So this is a little RV park, it looks like, with some questionable RV objects. So this is RV Camp Town, according to this. Everybody's come in here through the entrance, which is through the mountain, I guess. So you come in through that, which would be kind of a neat experience if you're going through a big tunnel and all of a sudden you pop out on the other end and there's a toll booth, and off to your right or left there's a whole bunch of coasters. So we do have the hint of parking lot on the end here. All the space is filled, so it's a pretty crowded day. These purple cars are in for a rough time if they're looking for a space. We have another space here, so exit only to the right, and I'm not quite sure where the two different lanes are going because there's clearly two lanes, but they're both going in the same way. So this is Reno, Nevada, according to the sign. Thrill Seeker Paradise, which I would say just Reno is a little bit of a shame. But here's our hotel, which we didn't get a chance to take a look at earlier. Again, full parking lot, so 100% occupancy, clearly. Kind of neat entrance building here, and I like the structure of the hotel just for one. It's a little bit interesting how it kind of dips down here in the middle, because I'm not sure what these rooms are doing unless they're double stacked. But I like the pool here, the beach volleyball courts, and all the little amenities and things like that. Seeing the staircase inside the glass here, and then your custom or your special entry into the park. I assume you get in early for the day, perhaps. So this is Camden Palace. This is the hotel name, which good enough name. And I really like this sign here, the billboard. So Premier Park, it's got the little Mario characters on there as well, and then some cool landscaping underneath, and a fountain, which is a little awkward that it's offset. You almost want to center that underneath. And here we do have the main gate tram, which saves you a walk and potentially crossing a bunch of traffic into the park itself, because that is a heck of a long walk over to the space until you turn around. But that kind of does it for the park. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything, since there are a lot of coasters in here. I kind of miss seeing these kind of parks in game. I mean, it's definitely got a lot of coasters and a lot of rides, but it kind of is some of the kind of do what you want aspect of it. You're not following any kind of park type. It's not a Six Flags park. It's not a Cedar Fair park. It's not a Busch park. So you kind of do your own thing, make your own coasters, make your own themes and things like that. So I do miss that aspect of it, and done in such a grand scale as this. It helps when the scenery types were smaller and there was a lot, or bigger, I should say, and there was a lot less detailing, so it was easier to complete something like this. But I mean, it's impressive. There's a lot to look at here, and it was one of those parks that was just kind of fun, almost like an arcade style game, where it was just fun to go look at and see all the stuff that there was. So I mean, this one right up there with Six Flags Worlds of Excitement, one of my favorite parks from when I was starting out, and still remains one of those nostalgic fun parks to go look back at. So we'll wrap up there for the stream, and hope you guys enjoyed looking at Premier Amusement Park by SupremeScreamer. I'll put the download link in the video if you'd like to take a look at it a little bit later. But a neat park, and definitely worth checking out. But join me next time when I'll pick another park to review. If you'd like to have your park reviewed, feel free to reach out to me. Just comment in the YouTube link or the YouTube channel, and I will answer that and get to the stream whenever I can. So until next time, thank you guys very much for watching, and have a good day.